Okay, so the East Indian Company was a charter established by Queen Elizabeth in the 1600s. They wanted to expand their charters, so they started trading with India for rare commodities like jewels and fabrics. By the middle of the 18th century, the company possessed exceptional powers to organize armies, acquire lands, and generate money, and impose laws on citizens of its territories. With its dominance over global commodities and networks, it generated almost half of the world's entire trade. So prior to colonial domination, Europe and India's trade was similar to that of the ancient Romans. India provided Europe with expensive manufactured goods, and the establishment of the merchant companies with monopoly powers over the nation's Asian trade and armies to defend and enforce them against their rivals were among the relatively novel trade practices of the European expansion era. And these businesses supported monopolies that upheld forces rather than free and peaceful trade in order to establish and sustain small colonies on land where they could gather tradable products and engage in political contacts.
Yeah, so from my understanding, like when Britain ruled, it was obviously like imperialism, and they were like ruling over in order to like gain money from trade. And they used pretty like harsh like military force in the time that they ruled to just keep the people at bay. But one of the documentaries was talking about how in the last 25 years, like usually they were pretty tolerant of just Indian culture in general, like Hinduism and Muslims and everything. But over the last 25 years, like tensions started to arise with Indian people just kind of hating the British rule even more because they were starting to be intolerant. Like the documentary talked about how they were bringing Christian missionaries into India and becoming less and less tolerant of any other religion other than Christianity. And they also talked about how they changed the official language of education from Persian to English. And then they also talked about how they would use the fat of pigs and cows as like to like seal cartridges or something. And this was like obviously super offensive to Hindus because that was considered like an unclean meat. And so like stuff like this over the last 25 years of their rule kind of like built up over time of like Indians like anger at the British rule, and they started to rebel, and then they fought for their independence and they ended up winning. But yeah, so but Gandhi wanted, like, he really fought for independence in that time.
So Gandhi was a moral leader. He was considered a peacemaker before he even came back to India. So his principles were based on nonviolence, and he turned the Indian National Congress into an activist mass movement. So Gandhi had some influence in South Africa. He was the moral leader there, and before he returned to India, he was already recognized as a peacemaker. He made people's actions and translated them into truth forces or truth power. And a big event that happened that sort of pushed Gandhi to fight more for independence was the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So it happened on April 13, 1919. It was a peaceful protest in a public garden, and British troops opened fire on a large number of unarmed Indians. The British troops blocked the main entrance and fired without warning and killed almost 400 and wounded even more. So after this massacre, a few movements that Gandhi led was the non-corporation movement. So in 1920, it just called on Indians to withdraw from engagement to colonial governments and its institutions, and to leave their offices, university students to withdraw, and consumers to boycott goods. So Gandhi also led the Salt March. It was British forces upheld monopolies and was determined on licensing and taxing the purchasing of salt. So Gandhi began on foot from central India to Gujarat, and his followers marched for about 240 miles. I believe it was 1,700 people that joined along the way. And then the last thing was the Quit India movement. So it was response to World War II, when colonial authorities were forcing Indians to join a war without consulting Indian government or getting Indian people's approval, and it led them to be self-governed after that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how like Gandhi, he was just fighting for like non-violence the whole entire time, and kind of like flash forward to like when India was gaining their independence and like Britain was trying to transfer the power over to India. They were trying to decide whether they were gonna split it in half between the Muslims and the Hindus, because there was just like a lot of like disagreement and like conflict between them. But then I guess like backtracking, one thing that I thought was interesting that the documentary talked about was how when India was trying to gain its independence, like all of the Indian people just kind of came together, no matter like their religion or like their gender, like anything like that, or like the class they were from. Like it was just this like, people in the documentary talked a lot about how like it was kind of like obviously a very violent time, but one person said it was like almost like the golden age for like Indian people getting along, if that makes sense, because they all talked about like the difference between like your like nationalist like like your nationalism and like your religion and stuff, and how like it was like not seen as like different, and that like the fact that they were Indian was the thing that just like tied everyone together, and that they fought for their independence that way, which I think was necessary. Like if people were still fighting like against each other as Indian people and trying to fight against the British rule, then I don't think it would have worked the way it did. But like the fact that they all came together and did it, I think is what gave them power to actually like gain their independence.
Yeah, and then one thing in that era that really stuck out to me was when we like talked about the city of Lahore in Pakistan, and they were like before, well, I guess it would be considered before India like fully gained like their independence, when they were splitting the Muslims and the Hindus, and it just stuck out to me because the violence that like occurred there, just nonstop between the Hindus and Muslims just because of their religion.
Yeah, like they talked about the stark difference between when India was trying to gain independence and how everyone came together, but then once they were trying to decide whether or not they were going to split into Pakistan versus just the rest of India for like Hindus and Muslims versus keep India all together, and Gandhi was like fighting to keep India all together because he felt like it was just like we're all one people, and like we need to like stay that way, and like we don't need to like fight and like let our differences divide us, sort of thing. But yeah, it was just like interesting how that like shifted, I guess, because they were all like fighting towards a common goal, but then like the minute that there was like a decision that was like gonna divide them, then they completely turned against each other. So like yeah, but the British government obviously did not handle the whole like splitting it at, like in half very well at all. Like they ended up like leaving India like before they even did it. So like usually the Indian troops or the British troops were going to be used to like help with the refugees and like protect them when they were moving, but they left. So like they didn't have any protection when they were moving, and they knew like the tension in the area, that people were murdering people and all this stuff. So like there were a lot of people that died, and yeah, it was just like really sad to hear about. And with Lahore, that city, it was like a really big city that was like super cosmopolitan at one time, but then once there was the tension of are we going to split, are we not going to split, people just started turning on each other. And especially when the decision was made that they were going to split, a lot of the villages like who had a minority of Hindus, like the Muslims would kill all the Hindus so that their city or their village would stay in their territory of Pakistan, so they wouldn't have to leave, and vice versa. So it was just like a lot of like over 1 million people died just in the migration when they were moving. Like it was crazy.
Yeah, I feel like it the whole thing when gaining independence, I feel like it definitely could have been handled better by those sides, and as a result of that, probably would have saved a lot of lives and changed probably a lot of the culture there at the time too.
Yeah, for sure. Because like they even talked about a specific decision. The dude who was drawing the line, first of all, he'd never even been to India before, and he was like drawing the line, which is like crazy. But when they were deciding Lahore, which was like a super big decision whether it was going to be in Pakistan or just the rest of India, like he held off on telling the people whether it was going to be in Pakistan or in just the rest of India for 15 days. And a lot of people believe that like if he would have just told them on the day that they made the decision, because like in that 15-day period people were like killing people because they were like wanting them to not have to move or something like that, and a lot of Hindus at that point believed that it was going to be in Pakistan, so they were just leaving. but like there were like massacres of people just like slaughtering like all across, and like they burned all of the Hindu like historic places where Hindus were living. Like the Muslim people like burned everything, and it was just like really horrible. And a lot of people believe if he would have told them as soon as he made the decision, people could have just left and it would have been like better. But the fact that he waited 15 days of like the tension of is he going to be in Pakistan or not, it led people to be completely violent, and it was really horrible. So yeah.
Well, I guess I'll move on to another topic.
Yeah.
We talk about like the matchmaking and the marriages in like Indian civilizations.
Yeah.
Is like matchmaking and marriage was a like cornerstone in Indian society, and it did end up changing like a lot through like the time frame or the time period of India being a civilization. Originally with like Dravidian kinship practices. Like originally just marriages between like close relatives. Like I had like seen or read somewhere it was like usually between like cousins or like aunt niece or uncle niece or like aunt nephew like pairs, which is real interesting. Like thinking about it in like our time period, because like to us like that's weird, but like in that day and like in that culture it's like completely normal until it eventually shifted to a more modern approach of marriage and kind of how more we see it today.
Yeah. I feel like before it was probably more like the matchmaking process maybe wasn't as elaborate because it's like you were marrying people like within your family, so it was like of course you're already compatible. But when they started to like kind of shy away from marrying like intermarriage within the family, they had to like kind of, it was a longer process of finding someone who like meets all the requirements of like your religion and your caste and all this stuff. That's not, because from your family like those things are given, obviously you're a part of the same everything, but like it's interesting like the shift.
And then another pretty big part of the matchmaking process was the pen parka, where it was like an event where the families of like the potential bride and groom meet for the first time, and probably it was like horoscopes or like exchange between the families. And I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's like the first time of like the families of the bride and groom like meeting each other, like and like trying to and like getting to know each other. But there's something about I'm not even sure where it's at.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how like different cultures value different stuff, because like in Western culture, like astrology and like all that stuff, I think people like don't put a lot of like value on that. People think it's just superstition, but then like in Indian culture, like it's everything. Like if you like don't match up in that way, then that's a really big deal. And like each person like goes and like predicts like all this stuff about like when they're gonna meet, who they're gonna marry. Because I remember forgot which girl it was, but in the matchmaking documentary, she wasn't ready to get married yet, and they went to the like astrologist person, and he was like, okay, you're gonna get married in this year, which is like 2 years from when they like did it. So she was like laughing at her parents because she was like, oh, I don't have to get married yet, like. And so it's just really interesting like how different cultures like value different.
Were you talking about like the story of like Radhika and Pira, I think?
Yeah, it was Ruchika actually, because she didn't want to get married. And so he was like, you don't have to get married, like you're not going to get married till this year. And it was like 2 years like later, and so she was like, oh, I can just like chill for a second. But it also is crazy how it decides your fate like that, because what if it said like that year, then she would just had to get married, or like her parents would have put more pressure on her because it was already like the fate was kind of already like chosen for her. Yeah, so it's like it's interesting.
It's like already such a gamble because it's having someone else arrange your own marriage, which is supposed to be like who you're supposed to like live with and spend the rest of your life with. So
yeah, it can go.
It's definitely just a.
Yeah, it can go really badly.
Stress there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I learned a lot about two different perspectives, because I kind of talked about in my presentation, I was like, as someone from the West, I always view that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's horrible. And I think like it does oppress women in many ways, but like it is like I think, important to look at the other perspective. Like, there is some, like, good intent to it of, like, you just want, like, your families already get along and, like, they become one, and, like, your religion is the same, your caste is the same. If, like, two people, like, believe in the same religion and stuff, it could kind of set a good foundation of, like, we have the exact same values already, sort of thing, and, like, you're attracted to them, but you don't really fall in love until after, which is definitely like really risky, but like it's also like
and
the
like,
foundation is
it's not 100% if you're actually gonna fall in love.
Yeah,
like
exactly. But it's like, at least if, like, obviously, like, the woman, like, believes all the stuff her family believes and stuff, like, and actually is, like, on board with that, and it's like, at least your foundation is the same. Like, it's not like you're just marrying someone who has a different religion or like anything like that. Would be horrible. But it's like more the joining of, like, two families and communities rather than just two people. And, like, here it's just like you fall in love and it's just two people. But I think in India it's like both our families are completely coming together. Like, it's not just about the two people.
Yeah, like you said, it has like somewhat of a structure with, like,
Yeah.
of course, they have to be the same, like, caste and same religion when marriages are set up like that. But it definitely, when it changed into, I'm not even sure what it's called. It's just like a free marriage, open marriage.
Like love marriage. So
Yeah, we call it that. That also. I can figure out what I'm trying to find. You just cut that part out.
No, you're fine. What was I gonna say?
Also, I think that the arranged marriage being indissoluble, like in all cases, I think that's like pretty unfair for women. Because like, what if you go into that and
It's
like
like
your
abusive.
families don't get along?
Yeah.
Like, you're living in the same house.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
Yeah, no,
If
it
someone
could,
dies.
yeah, or like if it's like an abusive relationship or something like that, it just like perpetuates the patriarchal society, which is just not good at all. But yeah, I think also going back to the astrology thing, like, we haven't really talked about like the Silk Road and like trade yet, and I think that's another thing. Like, I don't know where Western culture got that from, but it's like plausible that like we got like star signs and like astrology from like Eastern culture, like India and stuff like that. And I think trade, like, overall, like when we learned about that, it's like we talked a lot about how it's not just like trading in goods, it's like ideas and religions and cultures and like all this stuff. And a lot of like people from the West were like fascinated with Indian culture, and even under the British rule there were a couple like British soldiers or something that ended up joining with like Indians when they were fighting for their independence, because they just loved India so much and like they wanted to like fight for them and stuff like that. So it's just it's interesting.
And then another thing, like when you were just talking about, they're not just like exchanging goods and trading goods, they're like exchanging culture, because like in that time of day, like that time period, there was not a whole lot of means of travel, so like trade was one of the main ways that one culture would like kind of meet with another culture and kind of see how they live.
Yeah.
So they definitely would see things they liked about another culture and kind of adopt that in their society.
Yeah. Like, we have like medicinal like spices and stuff that we wouldn't even have, or like just like pepper, like that we use like almost like every day, and like all our food, like that's from India. Like, it's like I don't even realize like how much stuff is like from India or just like other places that we've adopted into our culture. And I think it's cool because it almost like optimizes every culture when you're able to take the good parts from different cultures to like almost make yours like the best parts of every culture, if that makes sense. And I think America also does that a lot with just like our diversity and like the amount of people that we have and stuff, and like different cultures brought in. But like, it's cool how we got that from India, and the same with India getting different stuff from us as well. You guys good? All right. Thank you.